In 1916, Britain's volunteer army would fight its first major battle. It would happen here, on the plains around the Somme River. "125 miles northwest of Verdun, the British and French armies met. Here the Allies hoped to break through the German lines with a joint attack along a 30-mile front. The commander of the British Army, Douglas Haig, is forever linked to this battle. Few generals in history have been so fiercely defended or harshly criticized.
Haig is, to me, remains, however much I think about him and whatever defences of him I listen to, remains to me a profoundly unattractive figure. He does seem to have been cursed by some emotional deficiency.
Haig faced a terrifying military problem. Decisive success on the Somme required him to break through the German lines. His army of civilian volunteers were patriotic and brave, but many had never been tested in combat. Yet Haig was being urged by the French to attack immediately. He was warned that if pressure was not taken off Verdun, France would collapse.
Haig was very aware all the time of the strain that the French were enduring. The French, in fact, were becoming desperate. And he was able to come up with very clear and crystal-like concepts of what should be done. And he had immense patience, immense perseverance. And he was able to stand up to a great deal of punishment and disappointment.
Haig agreed to a major offensive. By spring, he thought his volunteer army was ready to fight. The British battle plan called for a massive bombardment of German positions over several days. The German lines were to be pounded to rubble, their protective barbed wire blasted away. Then waves of Allied soldiers would simply walk across no man's land and capture the enemy's trenches. You will not need rifles, some soldiers were told. You will find the Germans all dead. Not even a rat will have survived.
For the first time, the British artillery had a lot of guns and large quantities of ammunition, which was an absolute novelty. They've got more guns and more ammunition than they'd ever dreamt that they were going to possess, and they thought they could shift heaven and earth with it.
Rumour says we are to smash the Hun line altogether, shove in our army and finish the war. Rumour also says that we have given Germany 4 days to declare peace or take the consequences.
26-year-old Kenneth McArdle, a second lieutenant from Ireland, was among the optimists. After spending a miserable winter in the trenches on the Somme, he was now ready for a fight.
I am not addicted to boasting, but I think if he could see all the guns behind, all the grenades, trench mortars and other stores in front, if he knew how thoroughly ready we are, and if he could conceive how we are longing for the day, I think if he knew, the Kaiser would cut his losses and take poison.
It was the biggest barrage that had ever been, so they were firing over 100,000 shells a day. And that, of course, gave the soldiers great confidence, because they thought, how can anybody live under this bombardment?
Stephen Westman, a doctor with the German army, arrived at the front just as the British bombardment began.
For 7 days and 7 nights, the ground shook under the constant impact of light and heavy shells. Our dugouts crumbled, tumbled on top of us. Our positions were razed to the ground. No food or water reached us. Down below, men became hysterical. Even the rats panicked and sought refuge in our flimsy shelters.
The bombardment prepared the ground and was supposed to clear the ground of fighting soldiers. It never really achieved this aim. The more heavy the shelling, the deeper the dugouts became. And it was certainly a nightmare to have to survive. But soldiers did survive.
On July the 1st, 1916, at 7:20 in the morning, there was an enormous explosion, filmed by an official cameraman. The British had detonated the first of 5 massive mines planted underneath the German line.
These very few seconds of silence set in, and this was the signal. Everyone on the German side knew this was the beginning of the rising of the Allied soldiers from the trenches and the attack.
The British got up out of their trenches, shoulder to shoulder for about 10 or 15 miles, and proceeded to advance across no man's land. And as they did so, the Germans, who of course had been waiting in terror in their trenches, realized when they heard the bombardment stop that the attack was coming, so they rushed up from their dugouts beneath the trenches and set up their machine guns and began to fire for their lives, literally for their lives, because of course it was kill or be killed.
It was a kind of relief to be able to come out, even into air still filled with smoke and the smell of cordite. They started firing furiously, and the British had frightful losses.
By now, Lieutenant McArdle was in the middle of no man's land, leading his soldiers straight towards the enemy's guns.
As we advanced, German shells littered the battlefield with dead and wounded. All around us and in front, men dropped or staggered about. I found a sergeant and, shouting in his ear, asked where were his officers. "All gone, sir," he shouted back.
The attack had been a disaster. Thousands of wounded soldiers waited for sunset to turn into darkness. As night fell, no man's land came alive as they began crawling back to their trenches. The ones that made it were taken to dressing stations and hospitals behind the lines. The film ended in the autumn of 1916, but on the fields of the Somme, the battle continued. Men fell in their hundreds, sometimes their thousands every day. The British would attack and the Germans would counterattack. So it went on.
It's probably true to say that the men who fought it had never seen anything like it before. The generals who planned it had no precedent. The other side of looking at it is more critical. This was not supposed to be an attrition battle, a battle to wear the other side down. It was stated as a breakthrough battle. But the longer the battle went on, the more evident it was that no breakthrough was possible. And yet, the battle continued. In some ways, it led to a redoubling of efforts. It didn't lead away from the war. It led to its deeper, more profound, more vicious prosecution.
The regiment was crumbling away. All the world was forever dead to Vaudrey and Kenworthy, to Chesham, Sproat, Ford, and of the other ranks. We did not know how many. Vaudrey used to enjoy early morning parades. Chesham had loved to hunt the buck in Africa when the heat was shimmering with the birth of the day. Young Victor was killed. His problem of marriage to a woman 6 years his senior finally settled. General Shea has wired, "Well done, 90th Brigade. You will attack again soon." We are about 400 strong today. We who went in 800.
This was Kenneth McArdle's last diary entry. Within days, he too would be dead. Only in November, when the weather turned bad, did Haig call off the battle. The Allied army had advanced exactly 6 miles, 4 miles short of the objective Haig had hoped to take on the opening day. There were over 1 million total casualties. 620,000 British and French soldiers and 450,000 German soldiers were killed, wounded, or missing.